Hi, I'm Sarah Tantillo. I'm the Managing Director of Humanities at the Great Oaks Legacy Charter School Network in Newark, New Jersey. Today, I'm going to be presenting on how to unpack the ELA Common Core Standards. Now, before we begin this workshop, which will probably take about 20 minutes, really recommend that you watch this with a colleague because periodically I will ask you to do some interactive work with a colleague. You can do this on your own, of course, but you'll just get more out of it if you work with a partner. Okay, great. So let me just get started. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm sharing this correctly. All right, great. So as you may be aware, I have a website called the Literacy Cookbook, also a blog, same name. And this workshop is based largely on this particular book, Literacy in the Common Core, Recipes for Action, but it also draws from my other two books. So I would really recommend that you take a look at those. Okay, great. Next, we're going to be using a handout. And just take a moment to make sure you have the handout ready to go so that you can type into it. And I'll be showing it on the screen, but you might want to just follow along as well with your own. So, okay, there we go. All right, my apologies. All right, here we go. So we're going to get into it. So we've got 4 key questions that we're going to answer today. What should we do with Common Core Standards data once we have it? How and why should we unpack the standards? And then once we've unpacked them, what should we do? Finally, what is this process probably going to cause us to do? So before we get started, take a moment and answer the do now. Why do these standards matter and how can they help us improve student performance? What are your thoughts right now? And then by the end of the workshop, you may have some additional thoughts. So press pause right now and take a moment for that. Okay, we're back. Now we're going to take a look at, first of all, reading standard number 1. In reading standard number 1, obviously a really important standard, we're going to look at the trajectory of this standard. So let's pretend for a moment that your students are in 3rd grade and they just took an assessment and they completely bombed on reading standard number 1. This actually happened when I was doing some work with some teachers down in New Orleans a few years ago. And they came to me and they said, oh, we're going to reteach that standard. And I said, hold on a second, because, you know, when people say I'm going to reteach something, often what they mean is I'm going to do the same thing, maybe a little louder. And so I said to them, let's look at the standards. Let's go backwards a little bit and see what we understand. So we know that they struggled with standard, the 3rd grade standard. Can they do the 2nd grade standard, which is bolded right here? And they said, no, they can't do that. So they're like, okay. I was like, hold on. Can they do the 1st grade version of the standard? And they said, yeah, they could do that one. So we started there and we sat down and in 15 minutes, we put together a handout, which I like to call the 5 W's and H organizer, that basically enables you to practice with students asking and answering the 5 W's and H questions. This is one of the few standards that, in fact, you can teach in one sitting. Now you have to keep practicing it, obviously, but you can directly introduce it and really concretely students can work on it. It's also one of the most important standards there is because if students cannot ask and answer the 5 W's and H questions, particularly why and how, they don't get to the level of inference. As you're watching this, I hope you've seen my comprehension process video module and you know that the first step is paraphrasing, then asking questions like why or how questions, and then you get to the level of inference. In fact, you'll notice as you look at the trajectory here that it mentions drawing inference in the 4th grade standard. Now, just to clarify, that doesn't mean that you don't have to infer until 4th grade. Most people do that when they start breathing, right? When they pop out of the womb, you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on, you're drawing inferences. But what this does mean is that in 4th grade, you will be assessed on your ability to draw inferences. So I'm going to ask you right now to go through this trajectory, ideally with a friend, and notice what's different from grade level to grade level, all the way up to 12th grade. What is different between third grade and fourth grade, for example? Well, we notice that's where drawing inferences starts to come in. And then in fifth grade, it asks you to quote accurately. All right. And so like that. So press pause, take a few minutes, and go through all the way up to 12th grade. And then we'll come back. Okay, so we're back. Now, one of the things that you might have noticed, you might have thought about, if let's pretend you're a sixth grade teacher, is you may have 25 students who are in sixth grade and they're supposed to be able to do the sixth grade standard, but maybe 10 of them are on grade level and 5 of them are on the fifth grade level and 10 of them are on the fourth grade level. So one of the things you want to think about when you look at this trajectory is how you can get all of your students climbing the ladder. What is different from the fourth grade standard to the fifth grade standard to the sixth grade standard, so that you can get everybody up to that sixth grade standard? Because like any ladder, you can't skip rungs in order to climb it. There's just too much of a gap. One of the cool things about the standards, if you think about it, is that they will enable you to differentiate. So if you realize that somebody's on the fourth grade level, you can target small group instruction to support those students moving up the ladder. All right, take a moment. And again, I would encourage you to jot your thoughts and then reflect with a colleague on why or how do you think it's helpful to analyze the trajectory of a standard. And by trajectory, I mean all the way from K to 12, because no matter what grade you teach, you want to think about what the ultimate path is for your students, where they're coming from, where they are, and where you're trying to get them to. So press pause, have a discussion, and then let's come back. Okay, we are back. Now, one of the things you probably realized as you were thinking about the trajectory analysis piece is that you have to really understand the grade level that you're working with and the one before it and the one after it in really close detail in order to understand how to help students effectively. And in order to do that, you have to unpack the standards. So when we think about this, one just kind of quick heads up. When designing lesson plans, I recommend using what I call the RPM objectives approach, rigorous, purposeful, measurable objectives. And I've got a quick overview here. You can find more information in my book, Literacy and the Common Core, Recipes for Action. And then if you click on this link to my blog, you'll see a bunch of blog posts about it as well. But essentially, when you're designing objectives, in order to ensure that you're really infusing your lessons with a clear sense of purpose, that you include not only rigorous verbs, but also this phrase "in order to," and some aspect of measurability. It doesn't have to say in order to take a quiz, but there should be some ability to be measured. So for example, when I do the workshop on how to design RPM objectives, this bolded one is my objective for that workshop. So we design RPM objectives in order to enhance the rigor of lesson plans and promote student learning and achievement. If you're an ELA teacher, here's one you can borrow, just put a different title in there. Students will be able to identify and analyze details about Willy Loman from Death of a Salesman in order to draw conclusions about his character traits. So in terms of measurability, you might fill out a character analysis organizer, you might write a paragraph describing Willy Loman, etc. All right, that's just a quick heads up on that, because part of the work that we do in unpacking the standards, as you will see, is we think about what our lesson plans objectives are going to be related to the standard. Okay, great. So I took the sixth grade standard number 1, cite textual evidence, etc., and I've unpacked it in this chart that I designed. The very first thing that you need to do, and if you've watched the comprehension process staircase analysis process, you understand you've got to paraphrase. You've got to put this text in your own words in order to ensure that you understand what is literally being stated here. This is a really good thing to do with a partner because different terminology suggests different ideas to different teachers. And this way you can kind of sort that out with your colleagues and make sure you're all approaching the standards with a similar lens. After you've come up with some form of paraphrasing, and again, there's not one right answer here, you're putting it in your own words. So you may have a different paraphrasing of the same standard than I do. You want to think about why we do this standard. This is really, really important. And unfortunately, too many people skip this step. And I think it's really critical because if you think about students being engaged in the work that we do, they have to understand why we do why we focus on the standards that we focus on. How can these standards be helpful? So as you can see here, my rationale was that we provide evidence to support arguments because no one would believe us if we didn't. That's one key piece of this standard, and so on. So think about the why in a kind of general way. If you were thinking about the main idea standard, or which is also getting into summarizing, you might think of one reason we summarize is so that we don't lose friends. What do I mean by that? Well, if somebody came up to you, a friend said, hey, what was that movie about? And you started talking for 2.5 hours, they would walk away, right? So you need to be able to summarize. So if somebody says, hey, what's that movie about? You can tell them like pretty quickly. That's summarizing. So keep your friends, learn how to summarize. Okay. Anyway, so think about the why. Again, talk to friends about this, talk to your neighbors about this, talk to your colleagues. And then you want to think about what skills students will need in order to meet this particular standard. So you want to break it down into really discrete, concrete bits of skills that they need to work on. This is, again, really important because you can't just work on the whole standard at once for the most part, other than that second grade standard that I showed you, the asking and answering the 5 W's and H questions. Most standards cannot really be done in one sitting, and you're going to need to do multiple lessons to teach different skill aspects of the standard. This is a really important thing to realize too when you think about students who might be struggling with the same standard. Maybe they're struggling with different skills related to that standard. Until you know what the skills are that are involved in the standard, it's hard to know what to do next. So for example, you may have students who can paraphrase and draw inferences, but they don't know the difference between argument and evidence. And if they don't, they're not going to be able to do this standard fully. So keep that in mind. Then you want to think about how you might assess the standard. Again, I just put a couple of ideas here. There are many different ways that you might assess this particular standard. Similarly, there are many different ways you might teach this standard. Again, it depends on what skills you want to emphasize. And then you can start thinking about, once you think about the skills and the lessons, start thinking about the objectives that you're going to try to meet related to the skills. And last, but definitely not least, you want to think about the questions or the question stems that will address this standard. These question stems will be really helpful as you design do-nows and classwork and homework to ensure that you're asking the right questions to address this particular standard. And the good news is I have a full handout on this that includes, it says PARC questions. It's really Common Core Standards questions that happen to be on the PARC, or now called NJ SLAE, for grades 3 through 11. If you go to my TLC PARC prep page there, you can download it. If you're working at Great Oaks, you can find it on the PD shared drive in this folder for this workshop. Okay, again, press pause, take a few minutes to think about how unpacking the standards might help you, your colleagues, and your students, and then share with a partner. Okay. All right, great. So take a moment now and look at standard 2. We like to call this the main idea standard. It also deals with summarizing, deals with, argument across a longer text. And again, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to analyze the trajectory of this standard all the way from K to 12. Again, if you can do this with a partner, that would be great. And when you're done with that, take the grade level that you work with and go through the unpacking process. It'll probably take you 10 or 15 minutes to just put down a bunch of quick ideas. You don't have to spend hours and hours doing this. Just get the juices flowing, get some good ideas there. Especially if you work with a partner, you can do this rather quickly. The one that I showed you earlier, I actually spent under 20 minutes doing, probably about 15 minutes doing. So you should really be able to do something similar. Again, with a partner, helpful. And then press pause and then come back when you're done. Okay, so we're back. The last couple of things I want to address. Once you've unpacked the standards, what should you do? It's really critical, now that you've unpacked a particular standard, to look at the key skills that you need to target. What do particular students need help with skill-wise? That's what you've got to think about. It's not the whole standard, it's discrete skills that you want to target. And then the other thing you want to do is look at the question stems that you're using that can help build those skills and strengthen their capacity to master this standard, and bake those kinds of questions into our instruction, right? So think about your do nows, classwork, class discussions, homework, etc. And once you've done that, unpacked the standards and thought about targeting the skills, you're probably going to be more effective at reteaching. You're going to want to scrutinize and probably revise your curriculum, maybe your schedule, maybe how you organize things, spend more time analyzing the standards, and then think about designing ways to address the Common Core standards across the curriculum. This is not just an ELA teacher issue. Anybody who teaches literacy instruction in any subject really needs to collaborate and try to support these efforts. And so if you can share your best practices and your lessons learned in grade level meetings and department meetings, it will help you and your colleagues get stronger in the work that you do to support your students. Last but not least, I have a list of recommended resources that you can take a look at. And then when you have a chance, take a moment and jot down some key takeaways from this workshop today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you so much.